Disturbing development on the border crisis. Wait until you hear this.
They're currently tracking 425,000 non-citizens who have been convicted of a crime who are roaming the country right now.
So after months of debate over the U.S. border, we now find out that 400,000 criminals are living somewhere in the country. And although that's certainly not as high as the 10 million border encounters recorded in America since 2021, critics say the presence of even just one dangerous individual puts both law-abiding Americans and asylum seekers in danger, and there's 400,000 people like this.
What we've learned from the acting ICE director, there are over 13,000 convicted of homicide who are roaming the United States right now. All these numbers we just rattled off, they don't even account for the nearly 2 million gotaways.
This morning, ABC News has confirmed a Lebanese man apprehended by U.S. Border Patrol has acknowledged being a member of Hezbollah, considered one of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. FBI Director Christopher Wray warned of dangerous people crossing the border.
8 nationals of Tajikistan with ties to ISIS have been arrested by ICE. The arrests took place in New York City, Los Angeles, and Philly.
We've also seen this series of robberies what the NYPD is describing as migrant-driven robberies in the area of Central Park.
The Border Patrol chief put a lot of blame on policy, saying if there aren't any consequences, people are going to continue to come, and you're still going to see the cartels smuggle people. It's quite possible we'll see another record year here at the southwest border.
So of the 400,000 criminals currently living in America, 13,000 have been convicted of some very serious crimes. But what nobody's talking about is even though these numbers do not represent the vast majority of asylum seekers, the real number of convicts secretly roaming our country might be higher than anyone knows about, because these are just the people we know about, which is a massive problem for the country no matter how you look at it, as dangerous individuals cause issues for everyone regardless of where they're from. Yes, they put citizens and permanent residents in danger, but these criminals, they're also a danger to immigrant communities made up of asylum seekers. And in many cases, the people who've fled poverty are the ones being targeted first. And for months, we've heard reports of gang activity and potential extremists infiltrating sanctuary cities throughout America in an attempt to carry out dangerous acts or build and expand their criminal empires, which they can get help doing by recruiting disillusioned asylum seekers who may have come to a sanctuary city like New York, but instead of finding a brighter future, now find themselves living in tents down by the river as the humanitarian industrial complex that makes money off their presence has no ability to connect them with the jobs they'll need to live on their own. But it's not just that dangerous criminals are preying upon asylum seekers. In many cases, we're now seeing crime spill out of sanctuary cities into working class neighborhoods outside of them, kind of like what's been happening in Aurora, Colorado, which reveals that after preying upon other immigrants, these crooks turn their attention to average Americans. And they're doing it while hiding out in sanctuary cities so they can evade federal immigration authorities for months on end. Which brings us to the real reason why we've now got an estimated 400,000 convicts living somewhere in this country, some of whom might be very dangerous individuals. Critics say there's just not enough effort being made to locate these lawbreakers and bring them to justice. And in many cases, these individuals are using fake IDs, fake names, and fake family members to conceal their past lives of crime. But as you're about to see, this raises some very frightening questions. First of all, how did these folks get into this country? And now that they're here, what are they going to do with their fraudulently obtained freedom? So obviously having 400,000 criminals living in your country somewhere, doing something, whereabouts unknown, that's a big issue. But the truly alarming thing about this recently obtained report is how many of these individuals have done something really, really bad. And what this means is local law enforcement throughout the country now has its work cut out for it.
To set the stage here, let me just explain what these numbers mean. ICE has something called a non-detained docket. Essentially what that is it means migrants who were encountered by DHS but are no longer in federal custody, who were caught and released at the border, released with the court date years away, they're in immigration proceedings, combined with illegal.
So these shocking statistics, they are from what's called ICE's non-detained docket list. And this is basically a list of asylum seekers who've had prior contact with the Department of Homeland Security in some form. And these are individuals who are no longer in federal custody and are presumably still in the country. But this non-detained docket, it's broken up into two categories. categories. The first category, these are asylum seekers who were apprehended at the border and were released into the United States while their asylum claim is pending. These are people who have a legal right to be here while that process plays out. But it looks like some of these folks have court dates that are 10 years in the future, which would mean 2034 is when they see an immigration judge and their asylum claim finally plays out. However, these are not the individuals that this recent report is concerning. It's concerning people who were convicted of a crime and still managed to get into the country. And in many cases, these are people who were ordered deported by an immigration judge, but are still here and have refused to leave. And some of these people will be your violent gang members who take refuge in sanctuary cities and try to expand their criminal footprint. And in total, this non-detained docket includes almost 500,000 people who've been convicted of something, plus an additional 220,000 that have pending criminal charges. Now look, law enforcement's not concerned about the millions of people who've come here legitimately seeking a better life and the American dream. They're not who everybody's worried about. But this brings up a big question. 400,000 people roaming about the country, that's certainly a lot. How big of a threat could this really be? Is this something that people should be alarmed about? And if it is, what is being done to keep everybody here safe, including legitimate asylum seekers?
ICE recognizes that some jurisdictions are concerned that cooperating with federal immigration officials will erode trust with immigrant communities. However, sanctuary policies can end up shielding dangerous criminals who often victimize those same communities. I mean, that would appear to be from the...
So in this country, we have law enforcement bodies whose job it is to find these people, locate them, and arrest them, possibly deport them. But in a sanctuary city like New York, that process is complicated. And since we don't allow our police to cooperate with the federal government, what that essentially does is it makes a sanctuary city a sanctuary for criminals. And that's because what most people fail to understand is that asylum seekers, they don't need refuge from a government agency who's looking for them. They're seeking asylum. They've got a legal right to reside in the country while their court case plays out. They don't need refuge from an immigration system that's out to get them. They're here whether New York is a sanctuary city or not. And asylum seekers are just as free to reside in New York as they would be in Texas or any other state because they are parolees of a federal court. And what that means is this idea of a sanctuary city only benefits people who are here and aren't supposed to be. But sanctuary cities are unknowing accomplices with these criminal organizations because we give them a place where they can hang out. And this is a constant source of frustration among the rank and file of ICE. That's immigrations and customs enforcement agents. And the reason this is so frustrating for ICE agents is because in a sanctuary city like New York, an asylum seeker will be arrested, charged, and released back into the community on their own recognizance. Now, most of the time, ICE will request that the NYPD hold on to that person. This is called a detainer request until ICE can come check them out and vet them and see if they indeed should be released. And if that process is successful, it will take somebody who's dangerous, potentially violent, off the streets, and they will immediately face justice for any crimes they've committed concerning the federal government. But the way this has been working out here in New York is that oftentimes those requests are ignored and those folks are released. And what do? They go back to the communities where they were living and continue terrorizing those individuals who in many cases are other asylum seekers or now are even middle income and low income neighborhoods in America. But it doesn't stop there because when an ICE detainer request is ignored, ICE can still go and pick somebody up. Doesn't matter if they're in a sanctuary city or not, but they've got to do it on the streets where that person's free. That could result in potential bystanders getting injured, or it could result in agents getting injured when in the past systems used to be in place before sanctuary cities where the bad guys would be waiting around in handcuffs to get picked up. But now the opposite of that is what's happening. So the interesting thing about this debate on immigration and sanctuary cities is it's causing people who in the past may have had a rather liberal view of the border and things like that to reconsider their positions. And it's causing people who may have in the past saw a valid position and valid purpose for sanctuary cities to reconsider whether or not that purpose still does the good that some of these cities thought was going to happen when they made these sanctuary laws 20, 30 years ago.
Is ICE able to get involved with detaining some of these folks who are bad apples, as they call them, right, and deport them?
Well, my staff is out every day. We're out in the public, in the community, trying to remove these public safety threats from our communities. The issue, obviously, that we face is we need the cooperation and collaboration with our law enforcement partners here in the city, specifically NYPD. The sanctuary policies won't allow them to cooperate.
So that is the New York ICE field director, and he says that the mission of his agency isn't to come here looking for people who aren't U.S. citizens and to cart them away. No. Instead, their job is to find dangerous people who aren't supposed to be in the country and help get them off the streets and out of the country. They're not just looking for anybody who's an asylum seeker, no. But he and his staff have to apprehend and remove dangerous criminals all by themselves. They're not getting any help from our local police. That's forbidden. And the problem, as he sees it, is without some form of interagency cooperation, it's not only much harder for them to do their job, oftentimes the people who get released make the area that they get released into much worse than it ever would have had to been if these systems still existed. Which means New York is no longer a sanctuary for immigrants, it's a sanctuary instead for crooks.
So what does the cooperation look like?
Okay, basically, I mean, obviously before the strict sanctuary policies went in effect under the de Blasio administration, we had a unit that was based in Rikers Island that would vet foreign-born individuals once they finished with their time, and they determined whether or not they were amenable to proceedings. We would have detainers on individuals that were serving time when they were finished with their...
So listen to how different things are today. In the past, ICE teams, they used to have outfits at various parts of New York where people are detained, like Rikers Island. And when somebody is getting released from a facility like that, ICE would be right there to check them out and vet them and see if it's safe for them to get released or to see if they're wanted for something else. But that doesn't happen anymore. And now when a tattooed gang member with ties to violent gangs walks out of a precinct or a jail or a prison, they can go back to doing whatever it was they were doing before they were arrested, and ICE doesn't even know that they're free. And obviously a situation like that does nothing but put people in danger, but who benefits from it? Legal immigrants? No, they don't benefit in many cases from sanctuary laws at all because they're here regardless. ICE isn't looking for them. And what's crazy is when ICE does end up making arrests, oftentimes they've got to go about it with their own information. They've got to watch the news and the television like the rest of us to find out if the wrong people are now walking around on the streets, which they've done in the recent past here by tracking down dangerous criminals, waiting for them at the house they were arrested at to see if they'd return to the scene of the crime. And that's how they went about taking down a massive gang full of repeat offenders that had many prior arrests here locally and were also wanted on a federal immigration level. Those criminals, they went back to their hideout after they were released. But what happened? Well, because they weren't getting any help from the local police, when they showed up at that place, they had to go and raid it and bring these people out in handcuffs. There was a struggle that all could have been avoided, but the entire neighborhood was put in danger. The officers were put in danger, and the people that they were arresting couldn't be safely brought into custody. They were in danger too. So what's the point of a sanctuary city again? What exactly does it accomplish?
We've been seeing the migrant encampments pop up all over the city, right? Especially on Randall's Island, where there has been some reported violence. Does ICE have a presence there? Can you have a presence there?
Unfortunately, at the city shelters and these pop-up tent areas, in order for ICE to be present there, the city would require us to have a judicial warrant for the arrest of a certain...
So this is actually the worst part about our asylum crisis right here in New York. It's actually being made worse and exasperated by the fact that this is a sanctuary city. That's taking away many of the opportunities that New York is trying to provide to asylum seekers in its shelter system, which are now places that are being taken over by gang members. And this is happening specifically at the Randall's Island tent facility, which houses 3,000 single adults. It's been hit with story after story of violence for months now, and there are even wanted posters outside the shelters describing various crimes, seeking information, offering a reward for helping police catch criminals who, once they're caught, won't be turned over to ICE if they're wanted by ICE, and who may end up getting released and getting to go live back in that very same shelter after being placed in the back of a police car. And when you think about it, a great system that keeps people safe would be for the local police to be able to cooperate with ICE, where ICE could then operate at that very same shelter. Think of how safe it would be if the bad guys weren't allowed to live there on a full-time basis. But apparently this isn't something that's going to be allowed to happen ever, because the way it works in New York is that ICE needs a specific request. What they can't do is just hang out in a place like this and screen people who they might be looking for. They need the specific information for one of those specific people before they're allowed to even be there. And not only does that create dangerous conditions inside the shelter itself, you see how there's a park around it? Well, that park is now home to a growing number of homeless encampments it's made up of people who were kicked out of the shelters but cannot leave the area as all of their immigration-related mail comes to that shelter. And if you've applied for asylum somewhere, you need to be able to correspond with the federal government by mail. If they were to leave the city or the area, they can't go there and get their mail and find out what happens. And this is what happens when your shelter system is so full that everyone who moves in gets evicted after 30 days because there's just no more space. But in many cases, these are now people whose lives aren't very good. They haven't benefited at all from coming here and enrolling in a shelter, and these are prime candidates in many cases for these gang members to approach and say, hey, come with us and you don't have to live in a tent down by the river anymore. Now, is the fact that someone's homeless an excuse for crime? Absolutely not. But what this does tell us is that there could be some people who are among this 400,000 criminal number roaming the United States, living in these shelters right now, and there's nothing the authorities can do about it because that's the law here in New York. And even with all the energy local New York politicians have put into sticking up for immigrants, nobody seems to want to stick up for them when they're living in a shelter that these same politicians and lawmakers advocated for, which is now making their lives worse and leading to increased crime in some of their very jurisdictions. A big problem. But do you want to know why this most likely is? People always say money controls politics, and by design, our asylum crisis does not affect the rich. It can't, as building shelters costs money. And the cheapest places to set up a large facility that's going to house thousands of people for an indefinite period of time are not going to be in areas with expensive, pricey real estate. And at this point in the asylum crisis, New York City has run out of formerly bankrupt hotels like this facility right here, which now houses asylum seekers. And what they have to do is they have to export their housing operations to neighborhoods where they can afford to do it. And since New York is a sanctuary city, what this ends up meaning is that some of the bad guys end up taking up residence in areas that are already neglected or held back, which is more proof that the entire apparatus of a sanctuary city, it's not helping the vulnerable, not vulnerable asylum seekers, not vulnerable Americans. And if sanctuary cities don't do that, if they don't help the vulnerable people who they're designed for, who are they helping? And is it a good thing for this country to have cities like this, especially when the crime that flows out of them is now affecting cities and towns nearby them that cannot vote for the laws inside that specific city to change? We're seeing this in Aurora, Colorado, which is affected by policies of Denver, Colorado, which is a sanctuary city. We're seeing this in middle-class neighborhoods throughout New York City. We're seeing this in areas of New York that aren't New York City. We're seeing it in New Jersey. Let me know what you think about that. Are sanctuary cities a good thing? What purpose do they serve if many of the people who live in them are allowed to be in the country anyways while their asylum case plays out? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.